All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We're back with our Dominican Studies Book Club. We haven't hosted these in quite a while because our professor went off to do his PhD and just abandoned us. Yes, Remy, I'm talking about you. Um, but I am on TikTok a lot. And Jasmine here has a TikTok where she talks a lot about Dominican history. And I sent her a message and I said, I love her TikTok. And I said, hey, would you be interested in running this book club for us? And she said, sure, why not? Así, a lo loco, sin conocerme. But she has been great. We sent her a copy of the book. She read it, and she's going to facilitate today's workshop, book club. And she's also going to review the book, Sharina. So we will be posting a book review on our website that we will widely distribute to get more people to read Sharina's body of work. Okay. So I am going to get off this video and leave it off to Jasmine to facilitate and do all the wonderful things she knows how to do. Okay.
Thank you. So first of all, like I was saying before, I really enjoyed the book once I understood where it
Jasmine,
was going.
Let me interrupt you for a
Yep,
second. So sorry. We have
no
the
worries.
author here, if you haven't noticed, Sharina, who's in Georgia, and she was so gracious to join our book club today. So be nice. No le digan nada más feo ni negativo.
Good point.
um, but Sharina is the author of Bridging Sonic Borders. So any questions you may have, she'll be here to answer them. Okay. Y ya me quité. I'm sorry, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Go
No te preocupes. But as I was saying, I thought it was so interesting and also kind of mind-blowing to do these types of connections, right? Of listening to the sound behind the literature, basically. And I did read all of the book, and I put a lot of notes in it, put lots of notes in it because I found it so interesting, but also it kind of made the gears run in different directions which I wasn't expecting to. So that's another point, Sharina. So on page 29, there's this one part at the bottom of the page. It says, with Papi, the author shows that the rigidity of spatial and cultural borders is a convention anchored in outdated ideologies that do not reflect the current reality of Dominican subjects. And it made me think of how as immigrants come over, they have, right? Dominican immigrants come over, they have their sense of identity already. It's already enshrined. But when they come, especially to New York, where there's so many bombardments of different cultures, and they see them like moving pieces of their culture, and they're no longer anchored in their culture. And it made me think about how my father would react to any like outside influence to the Dominican culture. It was basically out of fear. And we see a lot of that like in the different stories that you analyzed in the book. I saw a lot of that fear of wait a minute, that's not who we are. You need to stop that. You need to stop doing that. I don't know if you guys also saw pieces of that. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that point.
How many of you read the book? Okay. Ramon, what did you learn about the book?
Yeah,
I'm
well, I
gonna pick
was
some
definitely
names
thinking about
because I also know that some people are here for spoilers. So go ahead.
just like queerness. A lot of like queer related themes are associated with like, oh, Dominicans don't do that, right? And so like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that analysis was there, and how we re-inter interrogated the sort of conversations throughout the different passages like that. I don't know, there's a sort of like
nostalgia for that culture that you're talking about and the anchoring, but then all these passages that Sharina is like kind of analyzing in a
Mm-hmm.
way they're trying to bring it up and then kind of look at it from a different angle or approach it from a different way. And they all have that sort of like funky, like kind of pop to it, like con like the analysis of El Terror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or con Papi, just like that sort of like very like punk rock kind of feel, you know? Yeah. So I felt that.
And we can all participate. If anybody has experiences, anything that can relate, you can hop on right in. Yeah, and that was something that I think because my father was or is está vivo todavía de un campo de Guasumán, de Santiago. And my mom would always say like when he would be very resistant to any changes, to any es que eres del campo. Esa gente no cambia. Es del campo. No se le puede decir nada porque se ponen bravos. So that kind of anger that bubbles up in the immigrant, but we also see so many examples in the book of second generations, right? I wanted to ask Sharina, now that you're here, when you say in the book first and second generation, because I know that I've noticed that some people use it in different ways. How are you using that in the book?
So first generation immigrants in the US. Most of the parents are first generation immigrants in the US. And then I talk about that the second generation of Dominicans who are kids of immigrants, but yeah, they are born in the US, right? So I'm trying to differentiate with that. And for me, it was important to do that because I am what they call one and a half generation,
Hmm.
right? I came here and there's Gustavo Perez Firmat describes it very well. He has a book called It's Gonna Come to Me. He talks about the one and a half generations of Cubans. Um, and the one and a halfers are those who came to the US at an age where they were not small children anymore, anything between, let's say, age 8 to 9 or 10 to in their teens. Josefina Baez, for instance, is a one and a half generationer because she came here when she was 12 years old, right? So my circle of migration to the US started when I was 9, and I was constantly going back and forth because I have family here, family there, and it was a constant back and forth until I said this is over. So um, then I see my nephews who are born here, who are second generation Dominicans, first generation US American, right? But
Hmm.
by talking about second generation, I felt that I wanted to create a continuity of Dominicanidad because I wanted to say, yeah, they are born in the US, but they are still second generation Dominican, right? So that's and there's people who use it differently. Some
Hmm.
use it as I do. And I decided to make that decision when I did this. And that's an amazing question. Thank you very much, Jasmine.
So, Sharina,
Yeah, and I asked it for,
what do you call
sorry.
so what do you call the generation that came here under 5, under 9?
That would be a question for a sociologist, right? Or someone who has come up with the term, because that is a great question. They made these things, these arbitrary decisions, and I don't know if there's a role from 1 to 5 and such. When Gustavo Perez Firmat was talking about it, I think he made a cutoff in a decision. I don't know if him being that kind of during the time he came, it was during the Peter Pan and all of this was happening in Cuba. So I don't know if that influenced the way he conceived one and a halfers. So we're taking that because honestly, we don't really have um, that I'm taking that experience from a broader Latinx studies experience rather than basing it only on Dominicans, because the book is also framed within the Latinx studies approach, right? Like I'm approaching it as a Latinx studies book. So
Okay.
I wanted to do this using that terminology.
Ahora me siento una generación perdida porque yo vine a los 5 años, yo vine a los 5 años, ¿verdad? Y hasta late teens, I was traveling back and forth to DR every summer. Mi mamá me mandaba para allá. So now I gotta figure out qué es lo que conmigo, porque
Yeah, what the terms are, and I wanted to ask about the term because when I've had conversations about this, people get confused because they're like, no, I'm first generation. My parents an immigrant. They don't give them a
right.
generation, you know? So that's why I want to ask because I saw the terms in the book, but then I was like, I'm not sure how she's viewing it, how she's seeing it. And those terms really reflect on the experiences, no, of how people identify themselves. Because, for example, here with Papi and the music, he brought the music over with him as part of his identity. And his daughter, from what I read here, she sees it as, oh, that's Papi's identity. You know, the music he likes. Eso es pa' él. There's I think it's page, where did I say it? Trying to remember what page it's on. That she says that, oh, a papi le gusta Cuco Baloy. I forget where that is. And she was, oh, here it is, page 41. A papi Cuco Baloy le gusta mucho, a mí no tanto. Sobre todo cuando saca su campanita y dice, y ahora es que vamos a hacer brujería. And then her perspective of it is more of like, no, a mí no me gusta esa. A mí me gusta más Johnny Ventura y su combo show. Todos con pantalones muy apretados, que según mi tía Leslie, se meten en los pantaloncillos para que se les vea más grande y bailan al mismo tiempo con camisas de color con los botones abiertos hasta el ombligo y los pelos y la cadena de oro afuera. I think all of us saw that, right? As we were growing up. Era algo parte de lo que estábamos experimentando. So I thought it was really interesting to see how he brought his own identity through the music, and then the daughter is envisioning what her father's identity is also through the music. So eso me llamó la atención because I having a Dominican father, my own father brought his own music, ¿verdad? Pero lo de él era Marco Antonio Solís, Julio Iglesias, todo esto del Piero, Darío,
Tu papá era un
era música
romántico.
así, música romántica. And I remember thinking, papi, apaga eso. Apaga. No ponga eso. I didn't like it. Pero ahora, my dad is in his 70s. Y cuando escucho esa música, ¿qué hace mi corazón? Ay, mi papá. So
Yeah.
it's like the reflection of how we see really the music doing what it does to us, to our hearts, to our minds, and what it does to the person who brings it over. Porque si papi dijo, como en alguno de estos casos, algunos, no me recuerdo en cuál capítulo era, de que hablaba de que algunas habían venido por huir, ¿verdad? De la historia de inmigración era no por cosa económica, sino por huir. Y muchos han hecho eso, de huir por irse, por dejar la identidad dominicana. And if my dad had done that, I wouldn't have been exposed to any of those things, to any of that music that I don't know where he got it from, but me imagino que igual lo recogió de su familia, de la gente de su casa, right? Even though he's never shared where he listened to it, why he liked it. Pero se ve esa conexión con su identidad como dominicano. Para él ese es parte de quien él es. So the chapter on hip hop was a big choke with me because one of the biggest things my dad would do was prohibit hip hop at my house. Eso de negro. No,
Oh, yes, we heard that a lot.
¿verdad? ¿Alguno de ustedes tuvieron esa experiencia? Where no me traiga esa música aquí, Lin. Y sí, y uno chamaco, vamos a decir segunda generación, ¿verdad? Primera generación Dominican American, because I was born here. Pero uno dice, but I like it. We're identifying with it, you know? It's becoming part of our background music of our experiences that we see in the chapter about hip hop. But then we get the no me traiga eso. My dad, he had a booming voice. Y era, no me traiga eso para acá. And what was my reaction? I started listening to it in secret. Para que no lo escuchara. I don't know, Ramon, if you ever had, or Madeline, had experiences where with your parents in the sense of music, ya que el libro eso lo que abarca, that you had to kind of hide what you liked.
Yo creo que personalmente para mí, mi mamá, sigue escuchando boleros también. Mi mamá le gustaba la música romántica. Eso, todos los sábados cuando había que limpiar, se prendía el radio y eso era música romántica. So, crecimos con eso. Y creo que sí, ahora también se ve mucho más, como ahora la música es más explícita y ahora como que nadie, no tienen pelo en la lengua para nada. So, creo que cuando se prende la música de ahora y los viejos de uno oyen la música, nada más dicen, ¿qué es lo que ustedes están escuchando? So, sí, eso, y también creciendo fue así también, porque creo que todo va evolucionando poquito a poquito y cada vez como que empujan, ¿cómo se dice? Un poquito más y se empuja un
Ujú.
poquito más y cada generación vemos como que empujan un poquito más y cada vez que los mayores están expuestos a eso, siempre tienen algo que decir. So, creo que sí que todos hemos crecido con un poquito de eso.
Sí, gracias. You have anything to
Um,
say? Oh,
sorry.
Maria,
No,
Maria,
hi. I'm
gracias.
so sorry.
Hi.
I'm so sorry for being late. I I'm Amaris and I live in Tampa and I'm Dominican American, nacida in Brooklyn. But I wanted to say that as far as music, I knew that like I also grew up with boleros en la casa, merengue, salsa, bachata. And I remember not knowing who Biggie was and not knowing who Lil Kim was at school. I have a distinct memory of the because it was a really black and brown school that I grew up in. My elementary school was PS316. And I remember some of the kids couldn't believe a lot of the black kids couldn't believe that I didn't know who Little Kim was because she was like big at that time. And then they asked me, they're like, "You don't know who Lil Kim is?" And I was like, Kimberly when she was little, because there was a girl named Kimberly in
Tú
our
no conoces a
class.
Raulín. ¿Y tú conoces a Raulín?
Yeah. So, because there was a Kimberly in our class and they were laughing at me, and I was like, dang, I don't know. I mean, you go into my apartment and it was like little DR. And so my whole world was Santo Domingo, the sounds, the TV. We only watched Univision. That and so the
Mhm.
same with the music. And my dad had those cassettes and he would listen to a lot of Leodan. I remember listening to a lot of Leodan growing up. And now I love, the Anthony Santos's classics and I'll listen to those in the car now and my kids are I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. They're like, "I don't want to listen to this." So I just wanted to share that. And I might have to leave soon because I left my 4-year-old on a game and I should probably bathe him soon. But I just wanted to share that.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And those experiences is what makes us, right? Like all those different memories that we have. I, for example, got bullied in school, similar because I didn't know who certain artists were. Imagine, and I was only in third grade in Providence, Rhode Island, which didn't had a good Dominican population, but not enough that like people knew what a Dominican was. And I remember getting bullied and getting hit in the schoolyard porque yo no conocía esa música. You're not American. You're not American. They would say over and over again. So I remember one day, telling my mom, espérate, mira, esto es lo que me está pasando. And she's like, you know what? Take the cassette that you have in your room con Juan Luis Guerra y llévatelo para la escuela. Y pon eso. That was her advice. That was her advice. And so she taught me not to be scared of my culture, not to shun away from it, make it part of me. And I did exactly that. And at lunch I would put it on and the kids were like, "What is that? That's weird. What is that music?" Blah blah blah. And I got to share, what it was, where it came from. I would put it on the bus. And that helped me so much to kind of solidify more of like what my household culture was and that it was okay. Because when you're a kid, it's more, you think of it as like right and wrong. Like, oh, I'm in the wrong culture, in the wrong social sphere over here. So that helped me a lot as well. There was also in the second chapter, I think it was the second chapter. Well, I mentioned this a little bit about like the reasons for migration. And I thought it was interesting that point that from I think it was it Papi's story or El Terror that he lived with like two other women, pero ellos habían venido por otras razones que no eran económicas. Sharina, if you can help me.
Just put that in the chat. It was terror.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
well, it's the stories of Rey Manuel Andújar.
right. Exactly. And I thought it was interesting that part of it. Because most of the time we think of people coming over because of economic reasons. So that's why they're here to work because no hay manera de trabajar allá y etcétera, etcétera. Pero en el caso de ellas, they didn't come for that. They came running from what? I don't think you describe that in here or the story doesn't describe it, does it?
It gives some of the things away because it was violence. The older woman saw her son being killed, so away from that violence. And there was some sort of disenchantment with the younger woman, which we don't get to get the whole full story, but one can only think that there must have been some trauma going on. So what the story kind of shows is the different and the multiple avenues of migration, the multiple reasons why people migrate, right? That we are not a monolith when it comes to migration, that we are plural. And the reasons are never the same, right? So kind of breaking away with that homogeneous idea of Dominicans migrate because of money, And to me, it was important to do that because a number of years ago, I was working in a higher ed institution, and one of my colleagues who was from another Latin American country, we were on a bus sitting together going back to where the university was, and she asked me, "So, your family had a lot of financial trouble because that's probably the reason why you're here." And I heard that question from someone who has studied Latin American studies. And to me, rather than judging, to me it was just impressive seeing that how many times we get obliterated, even within Latin American studies themselves, and people just have one way to see us. So for me, it was important to capture that in the stories that I would analyze in the book so that we see that Dominicans come from many different reasons and that we all have very different stories. Not to say that one story should be more privileged than other, but just to kind of say, hey, some people come here because, as you said it very well before, and I wrote here, some people want to totally disengage from the Dominican culture. Some people, and that's Silvio Torres Sayan, that's why to Silvio Torres Sayan, he thinks that the diasporic kind of approach is at times works in should be applied and works at times better with some parts of our community rather than immediately assuming that all of us are transnational by nature, you know? So I think that that kind of helped me frame all of that. And that just came from that idea of making this in the book came from that question that that colleague asked me. And
Wow.
that's it. Mhm.
I love that point because again, I'm going with the parents I have. I only have them. Even though I have other connections with my other aunts, who came kind of like Angie. They were young. Their dad, my grandfather came over. He came over, which is interesting, again, thinking of the reasons why people decide to leave everything behind because tienen una vida ya, no es como que vienen sin nada, vienen con algo, ¿verdad? And I think it's also interesting that for the most part, Dominicans are, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, have a bit higher education than a lot of other groups that have come after. And even with having all this access, because my mother was a teacher, she went to college. My grandfather was an engineer, he went to college. And even having all of this education, they still decided to come over out of curiosity. It wasn't a need, they didn't need to come, pero ellos vieron, bueno, no vamos para allá y ya se acabó. And they wanted to, just transfer lo que tenían en la isla, transferir esa cultura aquí, pensando que iba a ser de lo más bien. El otro día le pregunté yo a mi mamá, nunca le había preguntado, ¿cómo fue tu impresión cuando tú llegaste a Nueva York? ¿Cómo fue esa impresión? Because I had never asked her. My mom's in her late 60s. And she goes, I was so disappointed. So when I read that part, I think it was Poppy. When I read that part, they said like disillusionment with New York. De una vez pensé en mi mamá. Ella dijo, y esto no es, she said, miré por la ventana del avión y cuando yo miré así, y eso es Nueva York. Ella se lo imaginaba de otra forma. Entonces, igual ella las razones porque ella vino por estar con mi papá. She didn't need to. She didn't need to come. And I think that also affects so much the sense of Dominican identity. Because the relatives that I have who came for economic reasons, their sense of Dominicanidad, ellos no le importaba eso. Sí, 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 ellos se mezclaban, vamos a hablar inglés, vamos a hacer lo que hay que hacer, porque estamos aquí para hacer dinero. Pero los que vinieron así, por ejemplo, mi mamá, mi abuelo, que they didn't come with the intention of staying. They wanted to hold on to that sense of being Dominican. Like that was so important to them because they were gonna go back. My mom never went back. Pero para ella iba a volver. No sé si en Madeline si tiene alguna experiencia similar.
Well, they never do, I was gonna say. All the Dominicans, they come here and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna make money, we're gonna save to buy a house, and we're gonna build a house over there. And then after you build the house needs to build, an extension, an extra room, que si hay que hacerle una cisterna, que si la electricidad, que si, and then next thing they're 80 years old and it's hard to go, back, to it. So yeah, I think, like holding on to that sense of identity, it's huge sometimes. And I think that's why you go to certain places again, like in New York, you have like Manhattan, little Dominican Republic, because we're trying to be an American and trying to live the American dream. And then it's like, okay, how do I live the American dream my way? Well, I turn wherever I'm at to my place, and I think we tend to do that wherever we go.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Ramon, I don't know if you want to add anything. Do you have anything to add? Or Lynn? Lynn tiene su manita. Yo- I think, yeah.
Perdón, que estoy media tullía aquí con un problemita en el cuello. So I've been listening actively here. First of all, I want to say I am so glad that you addressed that, Sharina, because it's one of the things I think, you know, when as we start growing, I too got here about 4 years old. Um, and as we start growing into our own identity, of course, with traditional Dominican parents, because that is the foundation that we have. Um, there are certain things that you wonder about when you get out into the world, right? And one of the things that is such a major ignorance with people when it comes to Hispanics, and all throughout the nation, everyone's got a different view of what that is. Some people think, matter of fact, my husband, I'm married, my husband's American from Maryland, and he grew up thinking that all Hispanics were just Mexican. And there were so many people who had that same thought, who didn't know that there were other countries out here that you know Hispanics come from. And so when oftentimes, because there's this view that when you're coming, most immigrants come here from a foreign country because they are in distress, or because they are financially stricken, or because they come from, you know, a foreign country that is just in dire straits, and you know they make it look so like horrible, right? And we didn't have that experience either, you know. So it's getting that conversation to be opened so that people can see the extent of the different variety of reasons why people end up coming here to the United States. My mother just so happened to have come from a more privileged background in Dominican Republic. I would say we went from like the instead of like rags to riches, it was like riches to rags, you know. So she had her, just like today, in this day and age, people have allá tienen una señora que le cocina, una señora que le lava la ropa, una que le limpia, you know. That's, y una que cuida a los niños. Like that's what my mother had the opportunity to have that then. And then we came here, and we're like to Providence, Rhode Island también. That's where we grew up in the 80s, to, you know, food stamps and you know, block cheese, and you know that whole experience of like not having name brand clothes, and having to go to la iglesia que daban ropa, and we just were crossing our fingers hoping that there were Nikes in there, you know, because my mother couldn't afford here, you know, to get that stuff. So I'm just glad that you addressed that aspect of it, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. Part of what, you know, really grabbed my attention to come in here today was because the topic itself is just so like powerful. And I think, and I invited my friend Madeline here to be a part of this, because she's like the best Dominican poet I know in Virginia Beach. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that was my experience. My experience was that, just growing up and having people not recognize that you don't come from that. And I pretty much all my life shied away from saying like, no, but like we had a nanny, you know, because it would make it seem like, oh, but tú eres ya de muy popis, you know. So I've never ever said that. Matter of fact, it wasn't until I wrote my memoir that I expressed it finally, you know, kind of like what my upbringing was. So really important part of, I think, identity for us as Dominicans that you shared that, Sharina. Thank you.
And it's something that it's interesting to hear, because basically then you were conforming your identity to what an immigrant's supposed to be, right? To what an immigrant should be, not someone who just comes over because they were curious. In my mother's case, she had the same experience. Ella era la hija del gobernador, y ella tenía todo allá. Ella se crió con una mujer que lavaba la ropa, alguien que cocinaba, alguien. Entonces, el venir aquí especialmente a Nueva York, y como me dijo ella, todo estaba sucio. She came in 83, en el medio de las gangas. Eso eran tiroteos toda la noche. and she went to the Bronx the first few, I think it was like the first few months. De ahí se fue a Westchester County, very different than what the Bronx were. And so that idea of that the Dominican or the immigrant has to come from severe poverty, right? And I think a lot of Dominicans did that. Like they pretended, yeah, I did. I came from that just to fit in to that idea. And as one of the stories here, again, there's so many. I get a little confused. But the father, Eduardo, creo que era el papá, that he kind of whitewashed himself, right? Into American society because he saw that as a ladder to get up socially, right? And that made me think of my aunts. Right now, one of my aunts is assistant superintendent in the White Plains school system. Another one of my aunts, this is the same group of sisters, is she's a biochemist at the blood bank in New York City, right? But they all went to the same high school in Westchester. They were brought into this school knowing no English, where they were catered to. Ellos le diseñaron un programa a ellas, especialmente para ellas. Ellos sabían que iban a llegar because, again, my grandfather was not poor. They knew that they were going to arrive. Y ellos le prepararon este programa a estas niñas para que aprendieran rápido el inglés. Y toditas se fueron a la universidad, toditas se hicieron de carreras, muy bien. But they never went back. Nunca volvieron a Santo Domingo. And when I spoke to one of my aunts, the one I'm closest to, she said that she basically lost her Dominican identity because she had to integrate so deeply into the white American culture. Because where they were in Westchester, there were no Hispanics. They were the only ones. They were the only ones, pero eran dominicanos blancos. Ella es mucho más blanca que yo. Ella tiene el pelo como casi rubio. And so they had to integrate into that. They had to leave behind el merengue, la bachata. Their music choices cannot be Hispanic. And I remember going to them to stay. And como yo estaba siendo criada en una casa dominicana, yo ponía mi merenguito, yo ponía... Y mis tías decían, why are you listening to that? Porque ellas casi no hablaban español. Casi ya no hablaban español. ¿Y por qué tú estás escuchando eso? No, no, no. You need to listen to this. She would put on Mariah Carey, all these little Spice Girls. She introduced me to all that music I had never heard before. But now that obviously I'm older, I understand that she was doing basically what Eduardo was doing. Tapping into that culture that to her was gonna give her the ticket to where she wanted to go. Meanwhile, my like other cousins and other family members that lived in the same area, they didn't do that. Ellos dominicanos y pudieron conseguir sus trabajos y todo, pero no desecharon la identidad, which I thought was really interesting because they all went to the same school. They were in the same environment, but they deliberately chose different identities. So that was a connection that I made, at least for in my personal life. There was a point that I wanted to add. I don't know if it's this one. I put a whole bunch of notes in. I put a whole bunch of notes in. I'm gonna go with this one. I really liked on page 98, how Sharina talked about the entangled process, right? Of identity formation of the second generation of Dominican Americans and how I'm going to include myself, how we confront, negotiate, and cope with our immigrant parents and community. And it made me think again about my dad not wanting to hear hip hop, not wanting to hear rap, not wanting to hear any of that in the house. And I had to negotiate, right? If I wanted to um listen to what I wanted to listen to, yo tenía que esperar que se fuera, right? Que no estuviera en la casa so that he didn't have access to the sound. I had to basically cerrarme, right? And start hiding parts of what was becoming part of my identity para que mi papá no se molestara, para que mi papá no dijera nada. And I think all of us that have grown up with Dominican parents, we've all had different aspects, whether it was music, clothes, friendships, or attitudes that we kind of had to negotiate with our parents and be like, well, okay, I won't do it here, but now I'm going to become two people. La persona que soy en la casa con ustedes y la persona que soy afuera, ¿verdad? Y no sé si le ha pasado a ustedes, but for me, it was a very difficult time to be young and be negotiating those things because there was times where I was like, I don't care. I don't care. I'm gonna fight you. Yo me voy a poner lo que yo quiera. Yo voy a hacer lo que yo quiera. Right? That confrontation with our parents. And it comes again from that sense of identity. No, es que el dominicano no hace eso. Es que el dominicano no escucha eso. Es que el dominicano, etcétera, etcétera. But then the harder thing for us growing up here is that we didn't have enough exposure. You know, we didn't have enough exposure to the Dominican culture to kind of make it our own. So we had to make our own, I'm gonna say our own versions of what Dominican looked like for us, basically. Trying to think what other point I wanted to make on that.
I think Ramon has his hand up.
Oh, okay. I don't see anything on my side.
No, yeah, I didn't know if I should interrupt. I didn't know.
Go ahead. Please do.
What I'm saying is that like it's so hard to pinpoint Dominicanness. Like, you know, we all have different parents, like experiences. Um and that's what I was really impressed by reading it. For those who haven't read it, like just like Sharina, the way that you pivoted like from autobiography to like memoir to song. You described in chapter one about like how you're gonna bridge, like the term bridging, and explaining that, and then seeing it throughout the book, just like how you did it. I was so impressed, just like because I feel like because I'm in my PhD program right now, and we're talking about field exams, and I'm kind of nervous because I know I'm gonna be writing about Dominican stuff, and I'm like, yo, to like take on this sort of authority on like. Yeah, I could write about Dominicans when like you put 10 Dominicans in a room and it's like, oh, I didn't do that, or you know, like you can't pinpoint. But there's so many common things that you can do, talking about migration, talking about nostalgia, talking about sounds and music. Um, and Jasmine, I love the way that you're kind of doing that. Like you're talking about like music and how did we encounter that that sort of double consciousness that like
Hmm.
that Fanon and everyone. So it's so cool just seeing how we can relate to each other, even if we have different experiences or even if we have the same. Um, my question, Charina, is like, how did you approach that? Like, when this was just a seed in your head, organizing those thoughts, organizing how you were gonna bridge. Did you have like, did you have primary text in mind already and say, okay, I want to use these and that's how I'm gonna bridge them together? Like, how was your process with that?
Thank you for that question, Ramon. And if I may ask, I'm not that I'm gonna answer the question with a question, but I just want to ask, what are you doing your PhD program
It's a little different than it's in English.
in
So
English?
it'll be more like on literature, but I want to do music. I'm taking a sound class right now, and I mentioned your book to the author, to the professor, she was like, "Hell yeah, go to that Zoom." So yeah.
Tell your professor thanks. And I'm here if you ever need anything, truly. Because I
Thank
know
you.
how hard. And you asked me, and I ask you that question to answer now, going from that experience, because I was also a PhD student in a program where I when I proposed to do a dissertation only on Dominican literature and performance, that was my first premise. I was asked to kind of dig deeper and try to see if I could do a comparative study between Cubans, Dominicans, and Puerto Rican, because at that moment, and I totally understand that at that moment, I try to understand it and see it graciously, because at that moment, you know, Dominican, you know, had just won the Pulitzer 2008. And Julia Alvarez was writing, and some professors were using Julia Alvarez, but not many people in many PhD programs in what I was doing even knew about Rina Espaillat or knew about the work of Josefina Baez or knew about the work about this upcoming writer Rita Indiana that has become this huge. I think she's deemed the Caribbean writer, right? So I took 6 months to do that research. And I came back and I said, I cannot do this. If I do this, I'm not going to be true to myself. So I said, I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to do a Dominican only dissertation. So when I took that risk, I had to create my own bridges. So I became and then that I got to know Josefina Baez when I was doing my research. The Dominican Studies Institute, I cannot say and I cannot stress enough all of the help that I received building bridges from Sara Ponte, from Jensen Ortiz, from Jesse Perez. Like they helped me so much to create every little bridge that I wanted to create because I said, I'm going to create these bridges from what I want to do with Dominican authors. And then I was like, and I'm going to prove that there's enough of it. And proof of that was that when I wrote the book, then the book deviates from what I did in the thesis in terms of analysis. Also, you mature a lot when you write a book. It's a whole different process. You become another scholar. So I deviated from that, but I did use many of the same authors, and I ended up having to leave people out. Which to me, I had conducted a whole set of interview, which is probably with a performance group that's based in the Dominican Republic, and they come here a lot. And I said, I just don't have a way to create a bridge on this book for this, but I promise I will do it in another project, and then I left out Bachata de un Ángel Caído, which I wanted to put in here from Pedro Valdés. I left out Palomos by Pedro Valdés, and I just finished writing a review on that book because I says I owe that book something, right? So, I think you asked me how I did it, and I just said my life. I've been crossing bridges all my life. You know what I mean? So I said. So how do I create something that I understand and that resembles my experience as a Dominican American, Dominican Yorkian, however you want, whatever term you want to use, how do I create those bridges and how do I create it in a way that resonates with the reality of my community, my reality resonates with la realidad de mis tíos, la realidad de mi abuela, la realidad de mi mamá de algún modo que en este puente se quiso quedar allá y no acá. O sea, so how do I negotiate that? And that was my process. So it took a lot of reading to try and figure out. I knew I wanted to do something with literature and music. So that's why when Jasmine said I was expecting something totally different, then I found this other different book that I wasn't expecting. And I said, and that helps me because, when I put bridging sonic borders, I wanted people to enter not having expectations or having an expectation and then being surprised. Because bridges do that. In a world of division, like the world we're now, bridges are now the exception, right? So not that I wanted to be the exception, but I wanted to create vínculos. It was important for me to do that. So I don't know if I answered as I should have, but I kind of wanted to give you the full story. And since I asked you about your PhD, so I wanted to make that connection.
No, thank you so much for that. That was an awesome explanation. In answer to that question, I really enjoyed that answer. And something that going back to the hiding, going back to hiding who we are, in terms of everything, right? The music that we hear, everything else. And then there's one part on page 156. Because I don't want to take up too much time. I had a couple other things, but one page 156, it talks about the transformation of silence into language and how silence at times it's like it's louder, right? And so I thought, how does silence give us power? The poet says that she exercises all of her power and her power became silence. And again, I think we've all had this experience, and I saw so many references of this in the entire book of how there came a point where the character was just like, you know what? I'm not gonna say anything else. I'm gonna be silent. But that silence doesn't mean that they gave up. No, it was a sign of a transformation of power. And we see that a lot with teenagers when they're confronted with opposition, right? They decide, you know what? I'm just not gonna tell you. I'm just not gonna tell you. I'm not gonna talk about it. But I'm gonna keep doing what I want to do. And again, with all the different references in here, I did see that where the characters they continued on, right? They were like, no, I'm maybe not fighting this as verbally as I want to, but I'm going to continue transforming myself, right? I'm going to continue participating in the culture how I see it, not how people are perceiving it. So I love that you brought that in because I always thought of silence as trauma, as when, you get to a point where you just don't want to say anything anymore. But it doesn't always mean that. So I love that you like to me, I was like, oh my gosh, like when I got to that point, I was I highlighted it, I marked it. Me tocó. Me tocó, porque es otra manera de ver el poder que tenemos, no solo al hablar, sino al guardar silencio también tenemos un gran poder. So I love that you included that. Definitely. Is there a reason why you included that point?
There is a reason. There was an absolute reason for it. And one of the reasons I remember when I needed to, it's weird, when I needed to clear my head, I lived in New York for a while, for a long time. So I needed to clear my head, which is kind of ironic. I would go to Washington Heights because I wasn't living in the Heights. I was living in as a New Yorker, you move everywhere. I lived my last year living in New York City in the Heights, but not before that. I was in the Bronx, everywhere else, all right? So I would go there to clear my head. And I had a friend who's a friend still, and he's a musician. And you know how you go by Washington Heights o sea, el ruido es brutal. El ruido es una barbaridad. Todo el mundo tiene la bocina con la música alta, luego la gente está voceando, sale la música de la ventana de uno. Y me dice el amigo mío, and you find this to clear your head? And I'm like, absolutely. Because I got to reflect upon why all these people have all these sounds on. And it's because they don't want to confront themselves with silence. So the noise itself is how they deal with the trauma. They just avoid it. And we live in a culture that is, nosotros somos, nos consideran estereotípicamente, no estoy diciendo que eso, pero dicen que somos ruidosos, que somos esto, que somos lo otro, que somos bullosos, donde uno llegue, esperan que uno llegue allí, llegué yo. No, y no es así. No all of us are the same. That's another stereotype. But one thing that is actually kind of true is that when you listen, you hear a Dominican listening to music, no siempre es súbelo un chin más, súbelo un chin más. There's a need to not be in silence, right? So I think that Josefina Baez showed me like that book to me used to be my by my bedside book. Like I had it next to me, please, for a long time. And I would just go back to it whenever I needed to see, because in this world, silence is usually deemed that that person is traumatized or that person is inactive, is not saying if silence, or you know, which in many ways silence could be complicit. It is true, but at times you need to be in silence in order to reflect on how is it that you're gonna do things. How are you going to position yourself? And being in silence is hard. Like for meditation practitioners, for yoga practitioners, for instance, when you're doing yoga, you doing all the movements, you complain, you do this, and the moment where you have to be in laying down, the last few minutes of yoga, that's the hardest part of the yoga because you have to be in silence. So I kind of wanted to finish with that and turn everything down so that we also reflect collectively as a culture what it means to be for us in silence. And the silence is what's going to help us see that we still have traumas, historical traumas that are affecting our communities. So at times we need to put down the volume and say, I'm just going to deal with it. I'm going to be in silence. And so it's a long-winded answer for a question, but that's basically what I wanted to get through with this and why I wanted to close the book like that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And it makes total sense because at some point after we have all these traumas, because if once you read through the book and you get to the silence, right? I thought about that, like went through merengue, hip hop, todos los otros genres, right? And then that last part, we hit silence. And sometimes that can be the scariest part of our lives when we're alone, when no one's there to give us any advice or comfort. So, but in that part there that she said, like she transformed it, right? She transformed it into a moment of power. It made me reflect how sometimes it's about perspective, right? We see the silence as something bad, even with parents. Especialmente el papá dominicano. Mi papá era contradictorio, ¿verdad? Y nuestro papá, la mayoría eran así. No me hable, no, y yo no te estoy hablando. And you're like, espérate, pero I'm trying to like be respectful, be quiet, but you want me to talk. So we have that those clashes, and I like to see that different, like that other side of silence. I didn't see it in that way. So thank you for that. That was really it was refreshing to see and made me think a lot. So I'm gonna end it with this part in your epilogue. I really liked how you mentioned how sonic memories and experiences can affect our interpretations of text that we read and how that creates a unique experience for every reader. In other words, the way we imagine things and we hear things as we're reading, every person could be reading the same thing, but they're listening to something else, right? Their auditory experience can be completely unique. And I was an English teacher, so um I never thought of it in that way. Where, every student is probably hearing the background noise a little differently, the birds chirping a little differently, that guitar playing a little differently. So I think that's something so important for us that do literature, to kind of realize that the interpretation that we're going to get, depending on those sonic interpretations, is going to be so different because of those background noises, because of that lived experience, they're just gonna see it in a completely different way, even if we're all Dominican. Porque uno puede estar oyendo Fernando Villalona, pero no la misma canción, a lo menos que la canción no la mencione, right? So I thought that was an amazing point that you made there, and thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Like, I really appreciate you noticing and seeing that, because those are layers that are there that obviously I just threw it out there, and having interlocutors and seeing how, that intention was also there. You know what I mean? Because every reader has a whole different experience. Like, you and I could be reading Raquel Cepeda's Bird of Paradise together at the same time. We can be reading it out loud in the same classroom, or in silence in the same classroom, going line by line together. And if a car passes by and so Dominicano soy, olvídate que your experience is not by any means, as a reader, you're not going to hear the same things I'm going to hear at that moment. Because at that moment I may say, oh mi Dios, yo no puedo ir a Fernandito porque me voy a derrumbar. Y tú estás diciendo, here comes that song again that my dad used to listen. Hell no. ¿Sabes lo que te digo? Entonces, that sound interrupts, but it also adds to our stories and our relationship to what we're reading. And that's kind of what I wanted to get at, also with that.
Again, thank you for that. And this brought me back to when I was teaching in high school, that one part there. It made me think of the students that I had that would give me some like offshoot explanation for things. And I was like, what are you reading? Like, we're all reading the same thing. But now that I think about it, like their interpretation with all of everything else that they're channeling, right? Because reading and I know not everybody has the ability to read and imagine. I know that some people they can't do that. That's the truth. Like they read and they don't see anything. They're just reading. But those of us who can imagine, and especially when you're young and you don't have like the experiences, who knows what they're listening to? Who knows what interpretation they're giving that text because they're using what they know. So that really gave me a moment to pause and analyze as a teacher. That I might have to rethink some of the kids' interpretations. But I fully enjoyed your work, and I hope you will continue to produce more work for us to enjoy like this. Can I ask real quick where you're heading in terms of your next project?
When Angie asked me before, like I know that it probably wasn't as clear. Like I'm trying to write a book that captures what it has meant to grow up Dominican in New York. Is intergenerational, right? And multi-generational. Like, I don't want to, because in this book, I try to do that. I try to do an intergenerational dialogue, but many of the stories that I cover here are adult stories. So how about the voices of the kids? What happens with the children and the young adults? So, and Angie knows it way more than I do. There is a mass production of coming of age stories now. So I think there was a phenomenal book that was done by Trevor Buffon, and I forget the second author, and I'm sorry I forget him at this time, but they wrote a book of coming of age Latino in the US, the whole US. And when I read that, I said, oh my God, we have this and more, just to write a whole book on what it means to coming of age Dominican. So I put it geographically still. I'm still thinking, and here's where Angie can help me going forward. I situated it in New York, but I could definitely, I wanted to do that comparison work with Georgia, but because I'm here, but that's not working, that's not panning out. So if I find any other stuff I could get out of New York, but I still have so many ties to New York that it's important for me to tell those stories, right? So there's that. That's where I'm heading. And now I'm promoting the book. So if any of you are in New York on the 26th, come to Recirculation. I hear there's gonna be patelita and all of that because the host is putting a bunch of stuff. So I'm just gonna be there in conversation with Lorda Garcia Peña next Friday, and I'm just looking forward to having people read it and just be in community with me. Yeah.
A qué hora en que empieza?
A las 7.
Oh, I'm at the airport at that time.
I know you were leaving. Remember, we
But
were trying to see the times, and I
yes,
don't know
it's
if
all
it's gonna
right.
be recorded.
When are you gonna be at Lehman?
At Lehman, I'm gonna be on the 25th. So if you can, I would love for you to come to
In the
Lehman.
evening?
Yeah.
Oh, I could do the 25th. Lehman is like 3 blocks from my job.
Oh, I'll send you. If you don't have it, I'll send you.
It's in Wilfredo's class, right?
Wilfredo and Sagar and Magdalena, they're gonna do it in a bigger classroom because they're bringing other people.
Yeah. Okay. I'll
Oh,
ask him to send
I
me
would
the
love to have
info.
you there. Yeah, great. I'll
Yeah,
send you a
I could crash his class
crash Wilfredo's
on the
classes. Okay.
25th. Yes.
Wilfredo, if you're listening, you heard it. We're
I'll email him when I get off of this. I'll text him actually. I'll ask him for the info. But Sharina, thank you so much for
Thank you.
being here today for this book club. Jasmine, thank you for accepting my invitation to facilitate as well today. If you guys have suggestions on what the next Dominican Studies book club should be, DM me, send me a message, let me know what it is. I was thinking Raquel's book because we haven't read that. So, and I don't know how many of you guys have read Raquel's book, Birds of Paradise.
Mm.
So yeah, maybe I could possibly
It's
get
a
her
difficult but great book, you know.
to join us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, any suggestions you guys have, I'm open to it because I'm now inviting the actual writer to come talk about the book. Um, so yes, thank you so much. This recording will remain on our YouTube channel. And yeah, hasta la próxima. Thank you.